Welcome to another episode of TechXY Turbo. My name is Frank, and I am your host. Ian Valis, a strategic advisor focused on AI, leadership, and neuroscience, joins me on TechXY Turbo to explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way we think, work, and lead. As president of Prometheus Strategic Advisors and co-host of the Boiling the Ocean podcast, Ian helps executives rewire their mental operating systems for the AI age. In this episode, he unpacks his concept of Neuro-Optimization, explains why thinking has become cheap in the taste economy, and shares practical strategies for leaders who want to augment, but not be replaced by, artificial intelligence. Ian also reveals how dopamine-driven platforms hijack our creativity, why walking meetings unlock innovation, and what he discovered when we asked both him and his own custom AI model about his greatest accomplishments. Ian, it is great to have you here on TechXY Turbo. To start, can you tell our listeners about yourself, what you do, and the work you're currently involved in?
Absolutely, Frank. First of all, I wanted to thank you for inviting me onto your program. And I love your introduction. In fact, I'm going to have to crib from it for future podcast appearances because you did a great job. But basically, I describe myself as a personal AI strategist and executive coach. My kind of goal in life is to help leaders upgrade their brains, master AI, and become what I call attention capitalists. And we can talk about that in a second. And all of that is in the hopes of helping leaders, executives, entrepreneurs, professionals thrive in a world of infinite distractions and exponential tools. And a little kind of word about my background. I've had what I call an intentionally eclectic path that has covered about 6 different mini careers in 4 countries over 3 decades. I'm kind of sneaky old that way. And I've worked in politics, media, tech startups, leadership nonprofits, and management consulting. And for the last 15 years or so, I've worked as a strategic advisor to entrepreneurs and executives, and in my current capacity as a personal AI strategist.
Interesting. We'll get into that background. And speaking of your work as a personal AI strategist, you assert that leaders must augment themselves with AI or risk being replaced, and you highlight AI skills as career-defining now. So for executives who prioritize the enhancement of their overall impact, what would you say is the single most effective AI tool or strategy today you'd recommend they consider to improve their decision-making?
Great question. I probably have 3 answers to that rather than just one. First of all, I just want to highlight the fact that I believe truly that AI is a remarkable technology that probably is more on the akin to agriculture than any other kind of development that's happened in the last 2,000 to 10,000 years. I think it's that disruptive. It may not all happen this year or this decade, but over the long sweep of history, this is not just an internet level effort or impact. This is going to redefine work, philosophy, how we see ourselves, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I mention that is because your listeners should know that there's a strange bifurcation that has occurred in society today where there are people like, I think you and I, if I can speak for you, Frank, that are what I might call jokingly AI pilled, who kind of believe in the technology, believe its power and its impact is going to be immense. And then there are a lot of people who I understand are skeptical and see this as yet another version of NFTs and 3D printing and, talk to me when it becomes a real technology and it shows up in the statistics and things like that. So I just wanted to kind of underscore that we find ourselves kind of in those 2 buckets generally. There's no kind of middle ground. And so I'm appealing to develop a bit of a middle ground, which is if you don't believe, as I do, that this is a completely disruptive technology, but you want to kind of hedge your bets, what I call the 21st century of Pascal's wager, if you're familiar with that particular philosophical callback. It actually really behooves you to learn how to use AI to protect yourself against potential replacement by AI tools. And it also positions you very, very well in the marketplace where you have marketable skills against people who aren't as well versed with AI. So that's kind of my long-winded preamble to why this is important. In terms of your specific question, I have 3 specific suggestions for executives and leaders who want to use AI, effectively and quickly right now. My number 1 suggestion is to start using AI as a thought partner first and foremost. So you want to be not outsourcing your thinking to it, but treating it like a super smart friend who has infinite patience and an almost unimaginably encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And you can just bounce ideas off of it. And I say it as opposed to he or her because I don't want to personalize or anthropomorphize it anymore. But I think, Frank, you and I probably all had really good friends who are super smart and who we do this on a normal basis, but aren't always available, when we have a cockamamie idea or we just want to kind of bounce something off someone. The AI is always there, has this multimodal capability where you can talk to it, write to it, upload information to it. And so it's incredibly versatile that way. So number one, use AI as a thought partner. But here's the thing. You don't want to outsource your thinking to AI. So what I always say is always ask AI, but in the middle of any project or task. What do I mean by that? Well, always ask AI is it costs a few cents and a few seconds to pop open a browser and whack a question into ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever your tool is at the moment. But you don't want to do it right at the beginning. So, if you're writing a blog post, you don't say, to AI, write me a blog post on X. What I do is that I write out an idea or I write out a sketch or an outline or I put together all of my thoughts that I've collected on a particular topic. I try to flesh it out as much as possible. And then I take it to AI and say, help me structure this, help me organize this, help me stress test this. I even ask it to rank my essay on 3 criteria, persuasiveness, completeness, and novelty. Is this a trenchant, pioneering kind of thought, or is this a Me Too kind of idea that, everybody's written about or talked about? And so always ask AI, but use it in the middle of a project. In a more kind of plebeian example, say you're writing a really important email to an investor or a stakeholder or to a customer, and you think you've done a great job. You beavered over it for a couple of, maybe an hour even just to get it right. Before you press send, throw it into, your AI tool of choice and ask it to improve it. And if there's any, again, ask it to rank it on a score of 1 to 10, perhaps on persuasiveness, or if you're trying to close a sale, on whether or not it will help you close. And then invariably, and I've done this dozens and dozens of times, the AI will give you one nugget of an idea that will improve it 5%, 6%. Maybe it'll catch a mistake you've made. Maybe it'll find something that you're not supporting by data. Maybe it'll say you're sounding a little too strident here. You should, be a bit more open-minded, and so on and so forth. And I use my judgment, we can come back to it in a second, to incorporate one of those suggestions, and it instantly gets my email or my project that much better. And if you do that over time, that compounding effect is immense. And it's something that we have access to, again, with a few seconds and a few cents. If you spend $20 a month on the Plus membership of ChatGPT, you have almost unlimited access to that. So using AI as a thought partner, always ask AI, but in the middle of any project, not at the end, not when you're just about to press send, and then you copy paste, because what you always want to do is add your special sauce, your tone, your judgment and your taste to the final product before you send it out. And the analogy I like to paint is you're a world-class chef, you have sous chefs, they prepare the dish as to your instructions. You look at it, you help them while they're preparing it, but before it goes to the table, before it gets plated and sent off, you review it one last time. That's the way I think executives and leaders need to use AI. And then the last thing I would say is, this is what's going to come up a lot in our conversations, I think, Frank, is we have to be very intentional about what we outsource to AI, because whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, whatever we send over to AI frequently and over time will atrophy. So those skills of synthesis or of expression or finding the right word, if you outsource all of that all the time to AI, your vocabulary will shrink. Your ability to synthesize information quickly will evaporate. So we, invariably, as technology comes online, we lose certain skills. Socrates lamented the fact that the written word was going to destroy memory. And to a certain extent, he was right. But the trade-off was immensely positive in terms of what we were able to get out of writing versus having to memorize the Iliad and the Odyssey. So I'll take that trade. But we want to be aware of what we're trading off. And so my third piece of advice to executives is to be very intentional about what they're doing when they're outsourcing to AI, because those skills will, by necessity, atrophy over time. And so be very cognizant and very selective about what skills you're willing to give up in order to get the trade-off of this increased efficiency and increased output.
Ian, thank you for that thoughtful answer and giving away some of your practices. So for everyone listening, we'll have the full transcript, and Ian has a website blog where he regularly writes about some of these, and where we're with dozens of employees, and what you're saying, I'm seeing across the workforce now. A lot of people are using it like this and experimenting. Definitely an exciting time. And I would like to know what color AI Pilled is. So maybe at the end, you can tell me the color of an AI Pilled. So more on this, you developed the concept of neuro-optimization to help leaders upgrade their mental operating systems as you define it. You also emphasize training the brain's control tower to unlock its cognitive superpowers. So what do these concepts mean and look like in actual practice for a busy professional today?
Sure. Great question. Neuro-optimization is my catch-all term to describe how we can now finally learn to use our biology like a technology. So we're in the midst of this extraordinary revolution that started, let's take it for the mass market element of things on AI in 2020, late 2022, early 2023, when ChatGPT came out. But we're actually in the midst of an even more or equally important revolution that has really been in place for the last 20 years, and that's extraordinary advances in neuroscience. We have learned more about how the brain works in the past 20 years than we knew in the previous 200,000 years. It's really extraordinary how much more we understand about how the brain works these days. Now, it is still a bit of a black box. So I'm not saying it's a problem that's been solved. This is not, like we haven't sequenced the genetic code here in terms of the brain, but we understand so much more of how it operates. And it really is astounding, the level of power that we can get from, finally understanding what the most important organ in our body, the most complex piece of kit in the universe, bar none, operates. And so when I talk about neuro-optimization, I'm talking about availing ourselves of these insights from neuroscience from the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years to, perform better, be happier, thrive more, and just be more successful as people and as professionals. And so that's kind of the set piece to all of this. In terms of why it applies now, well, I don't think you're going to get much pushback from you on this, Frank, but I like to describe all of us now as cognitive athletes. It's a term I borrowed from a well-known author named Cal Newport. And the basic idea is that we use our brains to earn our livings now. We add value through what happens between our two ears. And while there are still people who, and maybe there'll be more people in the future, who earn their livings with their muscles or with their bodies, by and large, we're all basically knowledge workers to some degree or another. And our most important asset is our brain. That's what we bring to work every day. That's our tool of choice, so to speak. So we need to kind of prioritize that, and we need to treat our brains the way Olympic athletes treat their bodies, with great care, with a view towards optimizing performance, and so on and so forth. Just as they think of nutrition and training and understanding the way the body works to get the best gold medal results out of their bodies, we need to do the same for our brains. So what does that mean in practice? Well, number one, I would say on a general level, we consume far too much content in our lives. And I am the first to put up my hand and say guilty. But what does that do in practice? Well, we are flooding our brain with all sorts of information, some of which is useful, and much of it is, frankly, frivolous. And we are choking not only our limited bandwidth with all of this content consumption, but we are choking out our ability to create as a consequence, an unintended consequence of all this content consumption. And that's what I was trying to get at when I was talking about this notion of controlling your brain like a control tower. And I use this analogy, which might be familiar to a lot of people who have smartphones, which is we need to start putting our brain in airplane mode more often. So what do I mean by that? It means just as when you put your phone on airplane mode when you get onto a plane and you get on a flight, we need to start turning off the receive button, so to speak, in our brains and just fit with information so that we can catabolize it and start kind of digesting all of these, terabytes of information that we consume every day. The reason for that is that it's so important is because it's only through that white space that we create, both in our brains, but also, I would argue, for executives who are listening, in our calendars, that we can start to become creative. So I don't know about you, Frank, but a lot of my clients, and maybe you too as well, go back to back to back with these, kind of 60-minute meetings on Zoom that run for hours in a row without even a bio break, let alone a brain break. Right. And so we need to create these white spaces in between these meetings to kind of digest what just happened, prepare for the next meeting that happens, and get the most value out of what just transpired and what's about to transpire. And so I argue, to my executive clients, that you should have 20-minute meetings for 30-minute time slots and 50-minute meetings for 60-minute time slots. And you use those 25-minute meetings for the first 30 minutes and 50 for the second. And we should use that interstitial time to kind of wipe almost like a palate cleanser, brain-wise, to get prepared for the next meeting. And similarly, instead of always, and I'm guilty as anybody in this, putting in your AirPods and throwing on a podcast, or the minute you have a free second, jumping onto your inbox and checking something out, or checking the stock prices and so on and so forth. Sit in not silence, but stillness, and just let your mind kind of rest at best, and also create from that white space, because that's what's going to emerge eventually. If you push through that small and short and, kind of really frivolous pain point of boredom, you get to the other side of creativity, and so on and so forth. And so neuro-optimization is understanding that the brain is like a muscle that you have to, can you stress it and then you rest it? And the more we understand about how the brain works, the more we can tweak our schedules and the way we operate in day-to-day life to give us the best possible brain that we have, which is our best possible asset in our arsenal of professional tools.
Very interesting. And I think it's fascinating. You're talking about executives, but having just, sent a high schooler to college, I think this is a widespread, phenomenon issue. And I think, you think of technologies and you link them like TikTok, Instagram, other social media. And I think you call them a toxic form of distraction that robs us of boredom and the white space that you were mentioning that's really important for inspiration. And some other writers, Neuro, with his book Indistractable, talks about this and, how to break the habit of the phone. So scientifically, Ian, how do these distraction engines that it's not just executives, kids, everybody faces them in our feeds, the algorithm. How do these distractions that have dopamine, at regular intervals suppress our creativity?
So I'm really glad you brought up your son or daughter who's just going off to school, because this is important too as parents. The link between creativity and distraction is a complicated one, but one that I can try to unpack. So number one is that when our minds are bored momentarily, the brain shifts into what neuroscientists call the default mode network. And it's literally when your brain is not being subjected to distractions or stimulation. The best example I can give of when the default mode network kicks in is if you're on a long drive on a path, on a road, or a highway that you know well, and you're either listening to a podcast or you're even better sitting in silence. That's when your default mode network kicks in. And I don't know about you, but when I go on long drives or when I take a shower, I get this flood of ideas that comes out because
Totally. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's intuitive, and it's resonant with a lot of people because they've experienced this. Now, that's the exception. The rule is whenever we have a spare moment, a micro moment of boredom, we fill it with something. Either we pick up the phone to call or text someone, or we open up the app and we, swipe right, or we, check our stock portfolio on Robinhood and so on and so forth. Or, we do something even more, what I say, frivolous, which is, go on TikTok or Instagram Reels and just, get a little dopamine hit from all of this stuff. So what does this do cumulatively? Well, number one, it trains our brains not to be able to tolerate any form of boredom. I'm going to kind of call out something that I see in Los Angeles where I live every day, and it scares me, but it also is, I think, illustrative of where we are. I call this stoplight scrolling. And you probably have seen this before, but you pull up next to someone, you look over, it's a red light. It's not a long red light, and they're looking down, looking at their phones. They cannot, countenance mere seconds of, boredom. And so they have to look at their phone. I also, for those people who haven't experienced this, and this is very common.
Do you think that's an addiction? Are they addicted to it? Do you think?
It's what I would call a low-key addiction, in the sense that, are they going through physical withdrawal? I don't want to trivialize, the kinds of addictions that some people really suffer from. But absolutely, we have trained our brains to be intolerant of boredom. And so the minute we feel it, that little pinch of boredom, and again, we're talking about a 30-second stoplight. We're not talking about, a 5-minute wait at the doctor's office here, or longer. They look down. And so it is a form of addiction, and it's a particularly pernicious one because it doesn't seem that bad. But I think for anybody who's been caught behind someone who's doing that, you have to honk their horn. If you've ever pulled up on the 405, which is the busiest highway in America, and you look over and people are talking on their phones or texting on their phones while they're driving at 60 miles an hour, it becomes very, very problematic, let alone for their brains, but for my brain too, so to speak. So the reality is that we have put slot machines in our pockets. And I call them slot machines because these apps have been designed with the same technology and the same scientific rigor that slot machines in Las Vegas and in any of these bars that you find themselves in have been designed. So it's things like intermittent rewards, where you never know what you're going to get. You open up the dating app and you're like, maybe someone's matched with me, or you open up your Robinhood account and my stock value has gone up. So they're very good at manipulating the tools that the gambling industry in particular has learned is incredibly addictive and incredibly entrancing, and putting them to use for more plebeian sources and things like that. So we have these slot machines in our pockets that are always available entertainment, and I would argue distraction, and we turn to them at every waking moment that we are bored. I don't know about you, but I like to go to the coffee shop, often during the week. And I have forced myself, when I order my drink, and I don't do it through the mobile order, I, speak to the barista, and then I wait for them to make my, iced mocha, frappuccino, or whatever it is. And I don't reach for my phone, but it takes an effort of willpower not to do so. And I look around and everybody's doing it, because there's like a 2-minute wait, and 2 minutes is too long for us to literally be alone with our thoughts. And not only that, we're missing out on life, basically. I've had business ideas. I've had business model ideas in Starbucks, sometimes related to Starbucks and sometimes related to something completely different, because I'm forcing myself to look up and look around rather than look down and get lost in this vortex of distraction. Right. So scientifically, here's the way that it works. So dopamine courses, whenever you are anticipating something that could be novel and exciting. So it's not actually when you are scrolling through Instagram that you get the highest dopamine hit. You get it as you open it, that little bit of excitement is when you pop open the app and it starts to populate, and your brain basically says, oh, look, let's see if there's going to be something good. And so that trains us to want to do it all the time, because we get this pleasure from opening the app, and the novelty, because dopamine also kicks in when you get something that's what they call unexpected reward. So, you're scrolling through your feed and you come across something that's great, and like, oh, I didn't expect that. I didn't know what to expect, but I didn't expect that. And so you get this burst of dopamine that also comes from the novelty. And what happens is that when you do that, you're crowding out your mind wandering kind of capacity, which is the default mode network, which I'll remind you and the listeners kicks in when you are not stimulating your brain. But the other thing that's really important is that there's this inverse relationship between dopamine and serotonin, which I think we might get to later in the conversation, but I'll maybe spin it forward a little bit and say that serotonin is the neurochemical that gives us satisfaction. We get it when we see a sunrise or a sunset, when we're spending some time outdoors with our friends. Maybe you get it as I do when I'm playing basketball with my boys, on a Saturday. And it's this feeling that your life is complete. And it's a wonderful feeling. It's something that we seek out. And dopamine is the kind of opposite neurotransmitter. It's I would call it the neurotransmitter of dissatisfaction. Because if you think about it historically, from an evolutionary perspective, we were the people who were highly dopaminergic are those kind of cavemen and women who said, you know what? I don't think that this valley is the be all and end all. I want to see what's over at the next valley. Like maybe there's more food there. Maybe there's better fruit there. Let's go over there. So the Stone Age people who lived on the savannah back then, who had a lot of dopamine and who decided, you know what, I'm not satisfied with the status quo. I'm going to go over there. Well, their genes propagated more, successfully than those who said, you know what, I'm good. Like we got a tree here. I got some shade. I got an apple in my hand. What else do I need? That's the kind of serotonin person. And so evolution has kind of tilted us in the direction of dopamine. But here's the thing: the 21st century gives us a complete surplus of cheap dopamine. We used to have to earn our dopamine. You know, those people who had to go to another valley, well, they had to cross, rivers, and they had to climb mountains to get to the other valley. What do we have to do? We just got over on our phones, and we get this like massive, hyper-stimulating dose of dopamine for doing nothing, for expending no calories, for expending no effort, and to get no reward really other than distraction. Right. And the thing is, sorry, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, no, I think it's just a fascinating topic. And, you had reminded me of, there's a great talk by Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. So he talks about dopamine, serotonin, and also oxytocin. And it's fascinating, especially as it does, relate to tech and our, managing impulses using machines. So can certainly, talk about this. I wanted to segue a bit into taste.
Yes.
So if you can we can kind of segue this into here. So in addition to the challenges with the brain addiction, dopamine, you also argue that AI has now started to make thinking what you call cheap, which I think is fascinating. And you say you'd mentioned before, but it leads to what you're calling the rise of a taste economy, where now judgment is the ultimate currency. So in this new state, if intelligence is now cheap, especially given your previous comments about, the knowledge and cognitive athletes, what are the new soft skills that are essential for employees, executives to remain relevant and valuable in this new landscape?
I love that question. And it tees up, really nice conversation that I hope we can have about this notion that intelligence has become commoditized. Basically, what Google did in the 2000s when it gave us the access to kind of the world's information is that it made information basically free. You didn't have to ever remember a fact. You could settle any bar, debate in a second by just Googling it. And information became commoditized. It became valueless in some ways. What AI is doing in the 2020s is turning intelligence, which is a more kind of purified form of information, kind of distilled and digested information, into a commoditized kind of resource. Now we have not just slot machines in our pockets, but we have the world's knowledge digested and ready to respond to any question that you have in our pockets. And so, whereas until recently, to succeed in life, whether it was in business or in arts or in anything you can imagine, one presumes that you needed to be intelligent. But actually now everybody has access to intelligence. When you have, $20 a month to spend on ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, you have an extraordinary and explosive amount of intelligence at your fingertips. Not just in terms of deep research capabilities and things like that, but the ability to put together business plans and so on and so forth. And so intelligence is no longer the scarce asset that it used to be. In this kind of world where intelligence is kind of multifaceted, multimodal, and everywhere, what becomes scarce? Well, I'll argue it's another thing in a second, but in the context of business, as you rightly posed in the question, it's actually what I would call taste. And what do I mean by taste? Well, I define taste as being kind of made up of two pillars: judgment on one hand and craft on the other. Now, think of almost these Russian nesting dolls, the ones that you might have seen on TV or, in that YouTube video. Within judgment and craft, there are two other nesting dolls. So what do I mean when I say judgment, which is one of the two pillars of taste? Well, it's values and analysis on that side of the ledger. So judgment for me is the combination of what you think you should prioritize for, whether it's in your business or your life, and a rigorous form of analysis that you've done either through, kind of gut instinct or pros and cons analysis or a strategic plan or anything like that. It can go, the full gamut between, just this is what I feel we should do, and these are my values, to, some multi-million-dollar McKinsey analysis, or, what I would argue a 1 hour of deep research analysis through ChatGPT. So judgment is one piece of taste. And the other piece is craft. And again, craft has two components as well. One is what I would call skill. So if you think of a chef or a painter, it's their skill in using the brush or, using the ingredients in the kitchen. And the second is what I call personal style or aesthetic. So anybody who's gone to a Gordon Ramsay restaurant knows that it has a certain vibe. It has a certain kind of profile for ingredients. If you look at a Van Gogh painting, you can instantly recognize his brushstrokes. Same thing with a Picasso. They have just this specific aesthetic that's just really evident. And so for me, taste, even though it sounds kind of superficial, is actually a really layered and textured combination of judgment and craft, which are these, components of values and analysis on the one hand, and skill and personal style or aesthetic on the other. Now, what does this mean for soft skills, the ones that you referenced we need to kind of focus on? Well, one is when intelligence is commoditized and accessible to everyone, we need to intentionally develop our taste. This is the thing that we will bring, to add value to in our decision making, in our ability to, kind of contribute productively to our organizations and whatnot. And so a lot of people say, well, I wasn't born with taste, or I don't have any good taste. What should I do? Well, first of all, you can't afford not to have taste anymore for the reasons I've just described. And secondly, there's no excuse not to develop that taste. And this is what I would suggest you do. One is intentionally curate your information diet. Our taste gets determined by what we expose ourselves to. So if you eat McDonald's or burgers all the time, your culinary tastes will go a certain direction.
Rather have grass-fed AI, better.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and same thing with if you consume crap informationally, you're not going to be, kind of developing your taste. So one is curate your information diet very intentionally. Two, and this is really important, and it's really adjacent to the notion of taste, is stand for something. How can we spot AI, verbiage or, copy that's really boring because it's right down the middle, doesn't take a stand. There's no conviction. Humans value conviction. The people who are great financial stock pickers, they have analysis, but everybody has analysis. What do they do that better than anybody else? They have enormous conviction. Like, trust me, buy the stock, you will not regret it. Or go, we all have that friend who says, Ian, I've never led you astray. Watch this movie or watch this television show. My friend Adam forced me. He said, you will love The Diplomat on Netflix. I'm like, I don't know, man. He goes, trust me. He had this enormous conviction. I watched one episode. I was hooked. Conviction matters in a world where we operate in a taste economy. So we have to train our judgment. We have to construct it intentionally with our information diet. And we also have to decide very intentionally what we say no to. So taste is as much about what you don't put into a product as what you do. Taste is as much of what you emphasize in your service as much as what you de-emphasize. So these are all questions that executives have to decide, and have to use their judgment, which is, again, kind of a portmanteau of a couple of different things. And so it's very important to develop your taste. And the last thing I'll say about this, Frank, is in order to operate and to succeed in a taste economy, in addition to developing your taste, you also have to make it visible. So you want it to be clear what your taste is. You want it to almost scream out there. You think about the newsletters that we like to read, or the music we like to listen to. It's recognizably of someone that, is just emblematic of their taste. A Grateful Dead album, I'm dating myself, but I'm not even a fan, but, it just has this distinctive sound. So does Taylor Swift song, their taste is visible. And similarly, when you look at an Apple product, from the packaging to the design, you can close your eyes, you can feel it, you can listen to the unboxing of the package, and you know it's an Apple product. So taste is visible in those things. So my advice to executives and leaders and the people who are listening to your podcast is develop your taste, but also make it visible, make it very apparent to people who are consuming your product or service that you would put your fingerprints all over it, and they can decide whether they like it or not. But the people who like it will love it, and the people who don't like it, well, they're not going to be your customers anyway.
Right. But I think that's a very useful model. I mean, in some ways, it reminds me of brand, like strong brands. People tend to love or hate. I think you'd mentioned, Taylor Swift, as an example of that. I also, though, I work full spectrum IT, so my work involves cybersecurity, and I do wonder about, the engineering aspect of it, are hackers who may try to subvert this taste, but maybe for another time. I want to get to a few other questions before we wrap up. This is very fascinating. Thank you for expanding this. One of the things you said before regarding Stone Age brain, I find very interesting. So I live on the beautiful Lake Erie, one of the great lakes, and I love riding my bike, along the lake. And I notice I have great thoughts. So I was wondering, when you talked about Stone Age brain, I think you mentioned that our thinking thrives when we're moving in nature or collaboratively, and it spurs creativity. So certainly the biking, but I was as much curious about how it happens collaboratively, particularly today where so many people are remote or in hybrid teams. So how would a project team of today use what you call the walk and talk concept in weekly meetings to spur innovation?
It's a great question again, Frank. And I love the image you painted of you biking around Lake Erie. And if you just know a little bit about our evolutionary history, and I've become a student of evolutionary history for the last 10 years or so, and it's just really a cheat code to understanding humanity, basically, but something that we've forgotten, is that our brains were not really made for thinking, at least not in the kind of Descartesian sense of bending over a computer or an abacus or a calculator and beavering away on a problem by ourselves. Our brains developed basically to communicate and to collaborate in hunts. Basically, we needed to communicate and to kind of coordinate chasing down big prey like mammoth. And not only do we need to communicate and collaborate, but we also needed to move because our brains were optimally designed to think and move at the same time. And what do we do when we put our kids in school or when we're trying to work on a project? Well, we work by ourselves. We, work at cubicles. We put headphones on, the over-the-ear kind that are kind of obnoxious, don't talk to me kind of vibe. We have virtual Zoom meetings mostly nowadays. And, I'm as much a purveyor of those as anybody because I work as an executive coach to people all around the world. And so we basically do the opposite of what nature designed us to do. And sometimes we have these moments, these epiphanies like you have, which is like, wow, I have these great ideas when I'm outside, taking in nature and moving. I wonder if there's a reason for that. Well, the truth is there is, because your brain kind of lights up when it's, in vitamin D in the sunshine and taking in nature. By the way, one of the reasons why nature is so calming to us is because it's not so busy. If you go to like a cityscape like Manhattan, you have so much stimulation, but you also have all these right angles, the skyscrapers and the streets and things like that. But if you look at nature, there are no right angles. Trees grow vertically, but they don't grow vertically perfectly. Hills roll and, mountains emerge, but they don't go straight up. And so that environment is intrinsically calming to us because it's not this hyper-stimulating environment and so on and so forth. And so and again, these are all parts of what I call neuro-optimization, understanding how the brain actually works and incorporating that idea into how we work on a day-to-day basis. So how does that relate to like a walk and talk meeting? Well, number one, humans are designed to think collaboratively, think in motion, and think outside, ideally in clement weather. Well, why did you have a meeting if you're trying to kind of be creative and brainstorming, where you take a person? It works really well on a one-to-one basis, but even a small group, and just walk around outside in the park immediately adjacent to your office complex. There are studies that show that 15 minutes, only 15 minutes in a city park. We're not talking about Grand Canyon. We're not talking about Zion National Park. We're talking about a city park. And we're not even talking about Central Park. We're just talking about a, normal park. 15 minutes in a normal park de-stresses you as much as exercise for an hour would be. It also inspires you because, again, you're in nature, you're calming. Again, if you're not screwing it up by, putting headphones in, listening to a podcast, or scrolling your, TikTok or your Robinhood feed. And so what I recommend executives do is learn about your brain, learn about the human brain, the Stone Age brain that we operate in the 21st century, but learn about your particular brain too, which is, hey, I operate optimally when I, work in the mornings versus in the afternoons, something about circadian rhythms that's really important. And so we need to understand what neuroscience has given us, which is this combination lock to understanding the most complex piece of kit in the universe, as I said, which is our 2 pounds of wetware that we have in our brains, and use that to our advantage. And things like walk and talk meetings, like going outside at lunchtime for 15 minutes without media and technology and just thinking without stimulation, is an extraordinary boost to your creativity and to your ability to synthesize and catabolize information. And that turns you into a better knowledge worker, which turns you into a better cognitive athlete, which allows us to fight off the influence and the threat of these thinking machines, which is AI.
Very nice. And I would say, though, in Buffalo, sometimes it is a little challenging to do that in January, probably easier in LA. But
well, I will tell you this, Frank. I used to live in Montreal, and I started doing walk and talks with my friend Mike, who works in McKinsey at the time, and we did it all year round. So I hear you, Buffalo has like a level of snow that Montreal did not, but you wrap up and you head out.
Yep. No, very good. So we're almost at time, but given your focus on AI, using tools, sharing what you do, I thought it would be appropriate to end our show by having you ask a question to an AI model I've set up about you. So I think we can do that on the show. It's ready to go. Do you have a question you'd like to ask about yourself? And I'd be curious if you projected what it might say, and we can kind of go from there.
I wasn't prepared for me to ask the question, but I guess I'll say, what is the best idea that Ian's come up with in the last little while, or something to that effect?
Okay, thank you. Let us roll and ask this question. It is absolutely, and I thank you for your patience. So for those who don't know, what we did in it for preparation for this is we looked at a couple of tools, Notebook LM, but in this case, we went on Google, and if you go on Google now, there's an AI search option. So I searched Ian Valis, and then I asked what is his greatest idea. And in terms of what the AI mode of Google thinks, it is your idea to earn more from failure than you learn from success. So that came up first. So interesting. But thank you. This is really fascinating. We can talk for hours on this. But before we wrap up, you gave a lot of practical advice, information. Where can people find this information? Where can they connect with you? Do you have a website, LinkedIn? What would you like to share to close us out?
Yeah. So thanks again, Frank, for this wonderful opportunity to speak to you and to your listeners. There's a couple different touch points that you can reach me at. So one is at ianvalis.com. So IONVALIS.com. That's my website. I also put out a newsletter called E-Intelligence. So it's IONTELLIGENC.substack.com, or just Google E-Intelligence, but add the O between the I and the N. And, speaking of that newsletter, I've recently launched this project called the Attention Project, which is a multi-part series on this idea that I have, which I was kind of hoping Google would have called out to me, but I respect its reference to my 2014 book, The Magnificent Mistake. This idea that attention has become the operating system of the 21st century, and how it's become this incredibly important, in fact, I would argue the most important form of capital today. So I would encourage your listeners, if you're at all curious about that, go on to Substack, find E-Intelligence, and subscribe for free to my newsletter, and follow along in that series, because I'm going to be unpacking this over the course of the next 10 or so weeks and building up to this crescendo where, I kind of explain my attention theory of everything, which sounds very ostentatious, but it's kind of tongue-in-cheek and fun, and lots of interesting thing. And then the last thing I would say is that, like you, I am a podcaster at heart, and I'm actually relaunching a new podcast with a friend and a colleague called Not Widely Distributed, coming out in January 2026. And it's about how we used to think of news as the first draft of history and not widely distributed. It's meant to be kind of the first draft of the future. So we'll be looking at trying to see around the corner, figure out what's next, and help our listeners prepare for it by telling them what it means and what they can do to prepare for it. So probably not at all dissimilar for what you're doing. I don't think it's competitive with Turbo or anything like that. It's probably a cousin podcast, if you will. But so it's my website, my newsletter, and my coming soon podcast. Those are probably the best ways. And of course on LinkedIn, email us on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me. I'd love to hear from you guys and gals.
Great. Thanks very much. So all of this information will be on the site and in the show notes. So that's techxy.net. And Ian, I want to thank you again for coming on. This was great. We could have gone even farther on all these topics, but for another episode. Thank you again. Have a great night.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, Frank.